The year is 1997. Starship Troopers comes out this year. The first Harry Potter book is released, going on to sell 120 million copies. And Sennheiser releases a headphone that will affect the headphone industry for the next 2.5 decades. The HD600. Now, these things became an instant hit, given their durable build and amazing sound. I can only imagine how good these things sounded back in 1997, given how long-lasting the sound signature has been. Now, 26 years later, they've only made a couple of changes to this thing. One is the yoke and headband design has become a little bit more squared off, a little bit more modern looking. They've also changed the paint scheme from that speckled blue look to this more kind of gunmetal gray matte finish look. Even now, 26 years later, I still think that this is one of the most accurate and neutral vocal reproductions coming out of a headphone. So technically, the HD600 is based off the HD580, which released in 1993. Some of you headphone historians, aka nerds, will know that, but Sennheiser likes to pretend that headphone doesn't exist, so will I. Now in 2003, Sennheiser launched this headphone, the HD650, costing a little bit more than the HD600, and to be what some would consider to be the superior headphone. To others, this was considered to be a worse, more expensive upgrade, and that the 600 was superior. I think that both are excellent headphones, and both have their own characteristics and properties that make them unique and very, very good. Most would consider the HD650 to have a little bit more coloration in the sound. It's not quite as neutral and, in my opinion, accurate as the HD600, but it does lean more towards enjoyability. The 650 has a slightly deeper and more focused bass, mostly due to the slight reduction in the treble and upper mid-range areas. Now this has some give and take here. On one hand, the 600 seems a little bit cleaner, clearer, in my opinion, more accurate, like I said, but the 650 comes across a little bit more thick and a little bit more engaging in the low end than the 600 does. Now the 650 is a little bit less vocal focused than the 600 is, and more engages with some of the background instruments. Those come a little bit more alive and are a little bit more forward than that of the 600. The sound staging is also a tiny bit wider on the 650 because of that introduction of the background instruments, though neither are wide headphones. In truth, both headphones are fantastic, and I think both are deserving to be staples in the audiophile community for the past 20 odd years. Now, speaking of staples, there is perhaps no bigger staple in the audiophile community currently than the HD6XX, which came out in 2016, boasting the cheapest price of any HD600 series headphone ever. That made this headphone incredibly popular and built a brand called Drop, formerly known as Mass Drop, into the brand it is now. And it's perhaps the most well-known audiophile grade headphone on the planet today. Now, being met with pretty much universal praise, this headphone was very interesting when it came out. So interesting, in fact, that it gained the appreciation and purchase of people who were not really into audio. This was the introductory audiophile headphone for many, many people currently in the hobby today. That being said, it was launched with not that much clarity as to what was going on and a lot of questions from buyers. Biggest question, is this an HD650? Now, the short version to this question is no, not really, but it's very, very close. The 6XX is a little bit darker of a headphone than the 650 is. The 650 has a little bit more active of a treble response. It's a little bit more forward in that region. Now, this headphone isn't necessarily more forward in the bass response and the lower mid-range response, but because it's less forward in the upper treble response, it comes across slightly darker as an overall sound signature. Now, this slightly darker sound signature left a lot of legacy 650 owners feeling like this headphone was a little bit muddy. But similar to the transition from the 600 to the 650, this even further leaned a little bit more into that smoother sound signature. Because of this, some users, instead of thinking that this was a little bit muddy, actually preferred the smoother, more laid back sound signature of the 6XX. Now this again, I think steps this vocal presence a little bit further back than the 650, and the 650 back a little bit further than the 600. So as of 2016, I think the 6XX has the least vocal focus of those three, while still being a very vocal focused headphone. We're just talking about various degrees of intensity there. Now, interestingly, even till today, this still might be the best value of any of the HD600 headphones. It's still one of the cheapest. It is $240 right now, but I do see it go down to $180 quite often on sales. And $180 for this headphone is an absolute bargain. Now, 1 year after launching their cheapest 600 series headphone, Sennheiser launched their most expensive 600 series headphone. In 2017, the HD660S came out. Now, along with the new price tag, this came with a slightly new sound signature, different from the previous versions. This leaned more into clarity and freshness than it did kind of vocal timbre and warmth like the other previous versions had. Sort of the opposite direction that the HD6XX was going. This also interestingly launched with the least amount of impedance, going from 300 ohms for their series of headphones to 150 ohms. I think the end users were divided into two camps. You had people who really liked the high impedance headphones like the 600 series, who really liked using them on tube amplifiers, for example, but it also brought down the barrier to entry for amplifying one of these headphones, and it made it very accessible and sound really good off of not very strong amplifiers. This also launched with, in my opinion, the widest soundstage of a 600 series headphone up until that time. Now, this soundstaging came with a bit of a drawback, and like the series is kind of going and will continue to go, it lost a little bit of the vocal intimacy and vocal focus that I think the 600 and 650 really had. And again, it increased the sound staging, bringing more of the background environment and sounds more into the forefront and making those more active and part of your music experience. Now, while this launched with the most expensive price for a 600 series headphone at $500, it has since 2017 dropped down to about $350, which is pretty close, about $50 more than the 650 and the 600 currently sell for. The Sennheiser HD660S2. This was launched this year at a slightly higher price tag as an upgrade to the HD660S. This has a little bit more treble, a little bit more bass. Now, in general, the response to this headphone has been pretty positive in terms of the actual headphone sound quality. It sounds really good, but the price tag has been a bit of a sticking point for most people, given the fact that it's $600. Not only is it one of the most expensive, well, the most expensive 600 series headphone ever, but it's also going against a lot of competition, and competition above $500 is very, very steep. Now, this headphone is admittedly a big departure from the original 600 headphone. It is a very, very different type of sound signature, much more involved in background sounds. Those are really a big part of the general sound signature of this headphone now, whereas it used to be almost entirely very, very vocal focused, with background sound really seeming like background sounds. Now, the preference of how vocals are actually depicted on each headphone is up to preference, but I think most people would agree that these headphones are vastly different in terms of their approach, even though their looks and some things like their general tonality is relatively the same. Now, initially in the S2 review, I actually thought that this headphone had the most amount of treble, but when I got the other headphones in, the 650 and the 600, I actually realized that the 600 has the most amount of treble in terms of frequency response compared to all of the other headphones, which I actually wasn't expecting that much. But when you listen to it, it's actually fairly obvious how much more forward that is than this headphone. Now, this was kind of strange, but I think Sennheiser is trying to welcome more frequencies into this 600 series sound. If you look at how these latest iterations are going, they're much more inclusive of other frequencies compared to the 600 and 650. Now, what's great about this line is that in its entirety, all of them are still available. You can still purchase the 600, 650, 6XX, 660S, and S2. So I don't think anybody needs to be frustrated over them replacing your favorite headphone or anything like that, because you have the option to get all of them, and they're all kind of floating, except for this one, around about the same price tag. Now, this one, I'm sure, like the 660S1, will come down in price eventually. I would probably wait for that to be worth it, because as of right now, the 6XX represents, in my opinion, the best value, and this represents the worst. Now, 26 years later, despite all the technological improvements, all the time that has passed, in my personal opinion, due to my preferences, the 600 is still the best headphone that they have made in this line. This is still the one that I like the absolute most, and to be quite honest, it's not even close. I'd love to know what your favorite is and why. I definitely can respect all the choices here. Like, I can see reason to like the 6XX the most. I can also see reason to like the S2 the most, or to like the 650 over the 600. But we all have our preferences and things that we lean towards and like for one reason or another. But I'd love to know which one it is for you. This line is incredible. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys next time.